Hello.
Yeah, welcome in.
Hey. Oh, thank you. What's good?
Not too much. We're just doing some debates. Are you at least 18? Because
Yeah, for sure.
we do
Yeah.
have some age restrictions here.
Oh
A-
no, you're great.
And then, are you a believer or an atheist or somewhere in between?
I believe. And then I mean, so when we talk, man, especially in high level debates, semantics is such a big pivot point for people who debate or present arguments. When you say believe, there's things I think about. There's things I know. There's things I believe. And I think there's differences in each of those, if
Yeah,
that makes sense. So there's things I think, there's things I believe, and there's things I know.
that's fine. So if there's something you believe in, like God, that's what we're talking about. I'm not suggesting that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God exists, but you definitely believe that God exists, right?
Right. There's a belief based on things I think and things I know. And
Right.
what I don't want to do is get into.
Oh, where'd he go? He just My queue just emptied out on it just cut everybody, and now he's back. Let me see what happened here. I don't know if this is something that happened with Streamlabs. Sorry, G, I don't know what happened, but Streamlabs just kind of like took a hiccup on me. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I'm not saying that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that your God exists, but what would be the most compelling argument for your God existing?
Well, again, back to the defining um, the words we use when we're having this discussion. Something you asked about was faith, and then, I mean, the first thing I would ask is, what do you think, or what do you believe, or what do you know faith is to be? So for you, what is faith? Tell for me. Could you tell me what faith is?
Yeah, well, I think the Christian definition of faith and the secular definition typically differ. So, for example, in the secular world, we would say, like, I have faith that my car is going to start, right? But we are using that word differently than you. The Bible defines faith as basically the belief in the unseen, right? The belief in the
Well,
unknowable,
sure. Where does it do that?
right? Book of Hebrews, chapter
Okay,
11.
specifically.
Yeah, want me to read it?
Yeah, sure,
I
please.
will put up. Says faith is the belief in things unseen and the evidence of things. I forget the rest
What?
of the quote.
Yeah, no, no. What's that second part you said?
uh, in things unseen.
And
All right, so I'll put it on the screen so we
yeah,
can
sure.
all read it. Says faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen.
Keep
Although
going.
it's different in each translation. It says,
No, no.
indeed, by faith our ancestors received approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. So the author of the book of Hebrews is suggesting that the faith
Right. Correct.
is
I mean,
is in
back to
the
the.
thing that is unseen. It's the thing that we believe, but we don't have necessarily the tangible evidence.
Yeah. Back to when you very first started coining. Did I hear the word evidence?
Yeah, I use the word evidence because some of the translations say the word evidence.
Okay. So, and then back to your first. Maybe it was analogy where we're talking about when we try to start a car.
Right. Yeah. So in the secular world, when we say something like "I have faith that my car is going to start," what we're not saying is that we have faith in the unknowable or the unseen. We're saying that I've got these historical data points that would.
Right. You have a confidence in something based on evidence.
Yeah. So it's more or less like a reasonable confidence in something, right?
Right, right. So I think through time and generations and people, because we're all those. I think the term faith has changed, where
Right, but
maybe
listen,
early Christians have said,
I don't.
I have faith in God because.
Listen, I had to mute you. No one really cares to define the definition of faith. I think we're just wasting everybody's time. What I want to talk about is the actual evidence. Whether or not we're using the word faith in the same way is not an appealing argument or discussion, and it doesn't do anything for proving the validity of your God. So if you don't mind, I'd like to get the conversation like actually on topic, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
All right. So what would be the most compelling evidence or argument for your God being real?
I'm waiting for you to unmute.
You're not muted.
Oh, solid. So, is there a point where I'm going to have the ability to mute? Because if you have any high level type of discussions or debates, the first thing you do is define terms so that we don't argue semantics. And then when definitions of words do come up, we don't just mute the other person. We get to a base knowledge of understanding.
Okay, well, let me just help you understand. So this is not a high level debate. We're not. We don't have a moderator here. We're not laying out a whole PowerPoint presentation. We're having a dialogue. And we can,
I'm not muting you to have my dialogue.
Yeah, and I am muting you because you keep talking over me. And what I don't want to do is spend a half hour defining terms that everybody already knows. You're wasting everyone's time. Everybody here, all 500 people on TikTok and 230 people on YouTube, we've all heard define the word faith 4 million times. You're not helping anybody. So let's just get on to the actual arguments, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
So what would be the argument or the evidence that would be compelling for your case?
In the way of evidence, do you have a specific question, or?
I don't have questions.
Okay, solid. So are we talking about?
I mean, okay. I could ask you some questions. You want me to ask you some questions?
We don't want to talk about faith.
I'll ask you a good question then.
We don't want to talk about evidence defining the terms.
Okay, I've got a question. Why do you think that Jesus is the Messiah?
Do you believe the Odyssey or the Iliad or the
Listen, I don't know what you think you're doing here. Why do you think that Jesus is a Messiah?
I'm speaking with you.
I know, and you asked me if I had questions, and now I've got a question. Why do you think that Jesus is the Messiah?
Based on the evidence.
What's the evidence?
66,000 manuscripts with over 63,799 cross-references in the Bible, written by over 40 authors over the span of 1,500 years, most of which who never met each other.
You don't think that this talking point is going to work, do you?
The same way I think.
All right, well, I'll just address your bad talking point. So first of all, the fact that there's multiple authors is completely useless. We've got the same thing. In fact, I've got a book right here. That is composed of quite literally thousands of authors. And it turns out that having lots of authors from the same culture doesn't make the book special.
They weren't from the same culture.
They were from the same culture. All of the people who wrote the Bible.
3 different.
I'm going to mute you since you keep talking over me and you don't have any Holy Spirit patience. So the fact that there's multiple authors is meaningless to me. They were all part of the same culture. They all came from the same ethno-religious group. Jeremiah was the one who wrote on the African continent. So that's not an actual special thing. Jeremiah was an Israelite. He was from the land of Israel. He wrote on the additional continent during the exile. So if I left America and I wrote down in Mexico, that is nothing special. That's meaningless to me. The other continent is technically the island of Patmos, if you believe that John wrote something on the island of Patmos. And again, John was a Jew. So every single text of the Bible was written by somebody who was part of that particular ethno-religious group. That's meaningless to me. What I'm more concerned with is whether or not the book itself is even coherent and whether or not it's true. And before I unmute you, I'll just address the manuscripts. Most of the manuscripts are not anywhere near the time of writing. For example, the oldest manuscripts we have of the Pentateuch is two little tiny scrolls, the Ketef Hinnom scrolls from the 6th century, and they have a tiny little snippet from the Book of Numbers as part of a blessing. That's almost 1,000 years after the events. The New Testament manuscripts aren't much better. We don't have any complete manuscripts of the New Testament until the end of the 3rd century. And almost all of the manuscripts, and I'll put it on the screen because I'm sure you've never seen it, and some of the guests might not have seen it, but what you're going to find is there's a distribution of manuscripts. And it's interesting that almost all of the New Testament manuscripts that we have, funny enough, come from the early medieval period. These aren't manuscripts anywhere near the time of Jesus. The fact that a bunch of people in the medieval period were really good at copying says nothing to whether or not the contents of the manuscripts are indeed true. And now you're unmuted.
Yeah. Hey, brother, could you just explain to me the mute process?
Yeah, the mute process is when you ask me a question and then I start talking and then you rudely talk over top of me so I can't answer the question. Then I have to mute you. So if you act like a child, I'll mute you.
Okay. What happens if the inverse occurs?
Then you can do whatever you want, whatever recourse of action you think you want to do.
No, I get it, but I can't mute you and explain my point.
Yeah, you're in my house. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's easy to win like that.
It's not easy to win. I have to mute. I have to mute you when you talk over me. Well, you notice how I've been live now for over an hour, and you're the first person that got muted. Do you think that maybe you're the problem?
No.
Okay.
When you're saying that I don't know what the issue is, why aren't people coming in? Why aren't people talking? I don't know if there's system errors.
It's not system errors. This is how TikTok works.
You didn't state that earlier?
No, I didn't. Sounds like you listen as well as you talk. All right, so enough with the crying, and let's continue with the bad arguments.
No crying. What's the next question? I mean, I mute
so
you?
my question was whether or not you had a good reason to believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And
I said based on the evidence, and then when
what's the evidence?
began to present the evidence, you tried to interject, and when I began to explain, you muted me, talked over me, and then that became the focal point, and we got way off topic.
Okay, so more crying. Okay. So what's the evidence other than the many manuscripts?
Well, what basis on historical evidence is there of anything other than reliable historical evidence, i.e. what people write, what people document, archaeological, geological evidence that we have discussed none of.
Okay, I'd love to hear it. What's the evidence for Jesus?
Okay, one is historical documentation. What is the number one reason that people can apply to this is truth? Would that be what we write, or what we photograph, or what we document? Right? That's historical evidence, what we document. Do you agree to that?
Yeah, photographs and documentations are historical, but are you aware that sometimes
before photograph, what was the historical documentation of any?
Okay, so I'm just going to mute you again because you wouldn't let me answer your question. I don't know why you can't let me answer a question. So your question was whether or not that is historical documentation, and I tried to give you an answer, and then you cut me off. So yes, documentation, written, photograph, etched in stone, those are historical documentation. But sometimes historical documentation says things that are untrue. For example, you don't believe that Nero resurrected from the dead. You don't believe in Herodotus Book 4 that a man named Aristeus resurrected from the dead either. You certainly don't believe that Honi the circle drawer was receiving revelation from God and could control the weather. There's lots of stuff written in ancient books that you don't believe. So just saying that it's written in a book isn't actually evidence. You need something better than somebody said something. Also, thank you for the $5 super chat. Jesus lied. Read the Bible. Nice job on staying calm and owning your callers based on what is written in the Bible. Christians are notoriously dishonest. I know this one, I don't know if he's dishonest, but he's definitely a crybaby already. I want to talk about what's actually written in the Bible.
Am I unmuted? I'm unsure how this works.
Yeah, you're unmuted right now.
Okay, solid. So I think one perspective is that we're talking about a book. So if I wrote a book that was 1,500 pages. That would be me writing a single book versus a compilation of books. So when you try to discredit the Bible as a book, it's not one book. It's many books, 66 plus books, again, written by over 40 people over the span of 1,500 years on 3 different continents, over 3 different languages,
Repeating
right?
the
Greek,
same bad talking
Hebrew.
point doesn't make it better.
Good. I just want to, hey, I'm not sure what has happened
We all heard the
previously.
broken talking point already.
Not sure what you have heard previously on the channel or prior to. But to discredit that as a single book with some inconsistencies, if you could point out some inconsistencies, maybe we can start there.
So
I
glad
guess.
you asked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus Slide, read the Bible. Thank you for the $5 super chat. He says the historical documents in the Bible prove Jesus is a false Messiah. This caller needs to read his Bible more carefully. I agree, and we're going to do that right now. Okay. So now, as it turns out, we've got a couple problems with the Bible other than the inconsistency. I want to address the point that you made prior. The point that you made prior is that you've got multiple books within the Bible, and everyone knows that. But as it turns out, basically none of them were actually eyewitnesses to the events. Mark was the cousin of Barnabas, according to Colossians. We don't even know if Mark wrote Mark. His name was attributed to it by church history. It is a completely anonymous gospel. Whoever wrote Matthew and Luke lived after Mark, or roughly the same time as Mark, because they copied from Mark. So certainly they couldn't have been eyewitnesses to anything. Matthew is very unlikely to have written Matthew, in that Matthew was an actual disciple. But when he copies his own conversion story as the tax collector, he talks about himself in the third person. Nobody does that. That's preposterous. The book of Luke clearly wasn't written anywhere near the same time as Mark. It was written much later after, and we find lots of the details in Luke are literally changing the details in Mark to make them fit better, which is, to me, just evidence that it wasn't written anywhere near the time period. In fact, there has been philology and stylometric analysis done on the Gospel of Luke that would date it firmly into the 2nd century, which is when I think it was actually written. Some of it was written then. Some of it was written prior. It's a compilation. The Gospel of John, we have no idea who wrote it, but the Gospel of John has multiple authors. They identify themselves in the 21st chapter. They identify themselves in the 1st chapter. There are multiple authors of the Gospel of John, which is why they refer to themselves as a we. That being all done and said, Paul wasn't an eyewitness to the resurrection. He fell off his horse and bumped his head and had a visitation with Jesus. That's meaningless to me. So none of these people appear to actually be eyewitnesses to anything. And even if they somehow were eyewitnesses to anything, that doesn't mean I actually have to believe what they say, for the same reason that you don't believe what other ancient eyewitnesses have to say. Now, before we move on to actually looking at the problems inside of the Bible, would you like to address what I said?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you make a lot of claims. They say, it has been said. I think just as much scholarly effort has been made on both sides to make claims of authenticity for what has been written and laid out and authenticated for both sides. I mean, I'm sure there's an argument that is able to be made that it is or it isn't authentic, right? You can cite secular scholarly authors versus Christian apologists who think in the same way about the scripture towards its validity. So versus what you say a secular scholar says versus what I say a Christian apologist says or a scholar has said in the way of Christianity and its authenticity. I mean, it's just a back and forth. I mean, we're not really getting anywhere with authenticity if we're citing who believes what, because it's a worldview debate.
This
If
is
I
a
go
book.
in, if
Listen,
I go in,
your yapathon is meaningless. This is a book written by an actual Christian scholar, Richard Bauckham. It's called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. And even in this book, a conservative Christian scholar is going to tell you the same thing I said, that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we don't have any original attribution. They're anonymous gospels. They're copying from Mark. Mark himself probably wasn't an eyewitness to anything. He was collecting other people's eyewitnesses and collecting them so that he can make his own account. We have no idea who Mark even was. We just think that maybe the gospel author, if he was Mark, was in fact John Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. This is from a Christian scholar, not an atheist scholar. And this is not a debate, within scholarship. I don't know who you're reading, but this is a nonsensical talking point. No, I got to unmute you.
No, yeah, again, great. Appreciate the mute, appreciate the unmute. Yeah, people read different books, greatly appreciated. I just don't understand, from my point of view, why this is this way based on this book I've read that supports this book I've read, other than research, which I 100% support and get, which is why we're here.
Well,
But
I've done the research.
Here you go. Hey, man, appreciate your yapathon. You've said the same thing you've said since your whole channel's been going. I don't understand any new points where you have proven anything.
You didn't ask me to prove anything yet. What do you want me to prove?
So
I could prove to you that Jesus is not the Messiah.
Okay.
Want to start there?
Sure.
We'll start in Zechariah chapter 9. You got your Bible?
I'll make myself available. Sure. Zechariah
chapter 9. I'll put it on the screen for everyone watching. I'm going to be reading from the NRSV updated edition. We're going to go down to verse 9 and 10. According to Matthew chapter 21, this was done in order to fulfill the words of the prophet, riding on the donkey, obviously. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Oh, sorry, I didn't put it on the YouTube screen. Sorry, here we go. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he. Humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. And the battle bow will be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion will be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. What part of that did Jesus actually do?
Sorry, I'm not being silent. I'm bringing it up so I can read it presently.
You don't have a Bible?
I'm bringing up the digital version of the version you have. Typically, I'm rooted in the...
Where'd he go? I think he just swiped away from the app and it cut him. He's not in... Oh, he's back. Hold on. I don't know what happened, but you're back now.
Yeah. Hey, brother. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, my bad. Yeah, usually I'm rooted in the King James version.
Wow.
However, you were citing another version, so I was just trying to bring it up digitally.
King James is a dog shit translation.
I mean, I would argue that.
Do you know Greek and Hebrew?
No, I mean, do you?
Yeah.
Probably not. Know Greek and you know Greek and Hebrew.
I used to know Greek. I know Hebrew though.
Okay.
I can still read Greek.
So, I mean, this is even a great example. So I ask you a question, inherently you say yes.
Well, I can read Greek.
Not quite an honest answer.
No, it's not an honest answer. I can read Greek. I just need to rely on a dictionary because I forgot a lot of vocab.
Right. So, I mean, that's the exact same thing.
But you don't know any Greek or Hebrew, do you?
Right, that's why.
How would you know that the King James Bible is a good translation?
Literally the same reason you just stated is so that I can rely on a dictionary or a translation. That's what you just said.
But I actually know the grammar. You have to know grammar to understand the language. You can't just look up a word and know what it means. You actually have to know how grammar works.
Right. That's why you look up Greek, Hebrew, the Strong's Concordance.
They won't teach you grammar.
This is when I would mute you for interrupting me.
No, go for it. Give it your best shot. Okay, so let's talk about Zechariah chapter 9. What part of this actually got fulfilled?
All right. Again, it's going to cut out for a moment while I look up your version.
Read it in any version you want. I don't care. What part of it got fulfilled?
So you started in 9, correct?
Yep.
All right. What about 9 in principle? I mean,
I'm asking
period.
you
Not
what part of it got fulfilled? What part of Zechariah chapter 9 got fulfilled?
your king comes to you. Okay.
Yeah.
Your king comes to you. Okay. So moving, someone's moving, righteous and victorious.
This your first time reading this?
Well, I'm reading it slow to us so we can discuss semantics, which you said don't even matter in an argument, right? Because the words are going to come into play here, right? So you said which part?
It was a yes or no question. Either you have or you haven't read it.
See. Can we see? Yes. Your king comes to you. All right. King is moving towards us. Righteous and victorious. Righteous. And then at this point, I'd ask you, what do you think righteous means?
I'm
You would say
asking you
semantics don't matter.
what part of this actually got fulfilled. Because the only thing Jesus did, according to Matthew chapter 21, is he rode a double donkey. But this isn't about a random guy who rode a donkey. This is about an actual king who's going to be victorious in battle, and he's going to cut off all of Israel's enemies. Did Jesus do any of that?
No, where does it say he'll be victorious in battle?
It says, "See, your king comes to you, triumphant and victorious is he." And then how is
Okay.
he triumphant and victorious? Verse 10.
Okay.
He will cut off the
Triumphant.
chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be cut off.
Yeah, okay, correct. So righteous and victorious doesn't necessarily have a war connotation, right? You can be righteous and victorious.
The passage tells you what it means. Verse 10, read it.
Okay, I
Tell you
will
what,
take away.
Take 5 seconds and read it to yourself, and I'll read out this super chat while you're reading verse 10 for the very first time. Glycan, thank you for the $10 super chat. Glycan says you should have each caller either begin or end with the admission that their God is logically contradictory and explain them the 3 omnis. I love talking about the logical problems of the omni God. I don't know if we'll get there tonight, but we'll see what we can do. All right, you finished verse 10?
Brother, you're just so. I love your passion, I do, and I'm 100% on board with your goal and what you're trying to get. However,
I'm just trying to read the book.
I get you, but I mean, that's not intently true. That's not what you're just trying to do.
I'm reading it with you right now.
I know.
Did Jesus cut off the chariots from Ephraim?
Brother, you said, are they currently present?
I'm asking you, did he cut off the chariots from Ephraim?
Okay, and I'm asking you, are the chariots of Ephraim intact?
Chariots ceased to be used 1,000 years ago.
Okay, so what's wrong about this verse presently?
Jesus didn't do it.
Okay, can you prove that?
Can you prove that he did? You might as well say Mr. Potato Head did it.
Okay, I got you. Can you prove that he didn't? That's the same
Can you
thing
prove that the
asking me.
Tooth Fairy didn't do it?
Okay, exactly.
Okay, so something isn't true. Something isn't true just because you don't have evidence for it. Like if I said the Tooth Fairy cut off the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem, it's not just true if you don't have evidence that it didn't happen. That's not how truth claims work. Also, Flanker, Thank you for the $5 super chat. Flanker says, read between the lines and ignore the lines themselves. That's always what happens. And GH, thank you for the $5 super chat. He loves your passion, the passion of Doug. I am filled with the passion of Doug. Okay. So the fact of the matter is Jesus didn't do any of this. Jesus came, he was executed by the Romans. Then the Romans steamrolled the Israelites. The exact opposite of what this says is going to happen. Thank you for the hats, Rusty.
Yeah. So the statement about something, you said something not being true just because you don't believe it's true.
That's not what I said.
Yeah. No, I'm asking. I'm not saying that you said that. I'm asking what it was you said in particular. It really resonated with me.
Something isn't true by default just because you don't have evidence against it. If that were the case, then it would turn out that Santa Claus is real and the Tooth Fairy is real.
Something isn't true just because you don't have evidence that it's not true, right?
Yeah, because things that didn't happen don't have evidence. You see?
Right. Yeah. But isn't that your whole basis or foundation for not believing in God?
No, my whole foundation for not believing in God is that there's no evidence that God exists. Like, my default position is when I believe in something, it's because there is evidence to believe in it. Also, iReactor, thank you for the super chat. That's not what faith is. So double think is using a large number of manuscripts as evidence, whereas most of these manuscripts were not yet discovered until the time of the KJV. I agree. Most of the manuscripts we actually have were discovered way after the KJV. So faith is believing in something without the evidence. I believe in things once we have the evidence.
That's what the definition of faith has always been?
No, that's what your definition of faith is according to the Bible.
No. I don't think so.
Yeah, that's what we just read it. Hebrews chapter 11. Were you with us when we read it?
I was.
Okay.
And you said
faith is the evidence of the unseen.
Evidence of the unseen. Okay,
Yeah.
so
is faith evidence?
Do rules of logic exist?
No, I don't believe so. I don't think that laws of logic are transcendental at all. Can you demonstrate that they are transcendental?
So laws of logic don't exist.
No, laws of logic are man-made descriptions for how things work.
So it would exist regardless of how men described it.
No, it wouldn't exist. The laws of logic don't exist. The laws of logic are descriptions that mankind made up. Rusty, thank you for the caps. I appreciate that. Just like the number one, just like the word faith.
This logically,
because it's a process. We are using.
So the process of logic exists.
We are using logic. We call it logic, and logic is the process that we're engaging in. Just like science is a process that we engage in. But science isn't a thing. Science isn't a metaphysical thing. It's not a transcendent thing that exists out there in the universe. Just like the word chair, there's no metaphysical chair floating around in the universe.
Right. So how do you know it exists?
How do you know what exists?
Science or logic?
It doesn't. I just told you. Science is a process that we engage in. There's a process.
The process of science doesn't exist?
There is a process that we engage in. And we call that behavior, we call that science. But so science itself...
something that exists that we call something.
Literally not what I said. I quite literally said science doesn't exist as an entity. It's not a thing. It's not a stuff. You can't touch it. Science is a description of what we do. Science is a description of a process that we engage in.
So it's not physical. It's something that we engage in, and it exists, but we just describe it.
Again, I just told you 5 times it doesn't exist. The laws of logic don't exist. Science doesn't exist. It is a description that we give to a process.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now I'm on board with you.
I don't know why this is so hard.
No, I got you. Now I'm with you. Now I'm on board with you, and I want to subscribe because logic doesn't exist, science doesn't exist, God doesn't exist. I'm fucking with you now.
It sounds like you're brain dead is what it sounds like.
No, I mean, I'm with you. The same way you describe how logic and science doesn't exist, but it's a process. All
right, we're going to move on to an actual adult. You can go somewhere else. He was so annoying, I almost sent a Pegasus just to get rid of him. Yeah, I guess does have a helmet. You're right, Annabelle.